Hey guys, Ranger here, and welcome back to another, hopefully, interesting video. Being that today is December 22nd, I decided I would, had the idea to do, hopefully a fun video, sharing with you guys some different Christmas memories. I thought, since Christmas is very much upon us, I thought I would do a Christmas-themed video and share with you guys some memories that I have about Christmas. Now, of course, some are not exactly as pleasant, but hopefully they'll still make for an entertaining video. That being said, let's go ahead and get the bad memories out of the way, shall we? One of the worst Christmas memories that I have is actually for Christmas 2009. Christmas 2009. That year, we lost power. We lost the electricity, and I remember the night that it happened. It was like it was 8 days before Christmas. I was sitting in the living room watching Ghost Whisperer. Next thing I know, one of the neighbors just up the road came down to the house and said they lost their electricity, and they wanted to know if they could use the phone. So they used the phone. I remember them sitting in the living room, and I remember them sitting right here on the couch, and I remember them asking if I mean we didn't lose the electricity at the time, and I remember they some of their family came up and got them, and I remember a cousin of mine who at the time lived just a couple of houses out from me, come down to the house, and they asked if I remember going out there to his house with him and to get it so he could get a flashlight. Why he didn't get it before he came down, I don't remember, but I remember going out there, and by that point it was pouring the snow. I mean, it was absolutely pouring the snow. And some of you might remember, back in winter of '09, winter of '09 was bad. Many different locations in the U.S., especially the southern, and especially I think the southeast, got hit. It wasn't a snowstorm, it was an ice storm. It was a freaking blizzard that we got. And some of you might even, some of you who live in those areas might even have your own memories of winter of '09. But so, you know, if you want to share yours, please feel free to do so in the comments or make a response video and tell your own stories. But I remember, another cousin of mine was supposed to come up to his family, and he and his wife were on their way, or his girlfriend at the time, I think his wife, they might have just got married, was on their way up. And I remember this younger cousin of mine and my dad and I taking a flashlight. We went over to the road, and it was already snowing so much that there was this huge branch that was hanging over the road. There was no way you could get by this thing. It hadn't fallen yet, but there was no way that you could get by this thing. It was hanging right across the road, vehicle level. There was no way you could get by. And I remember my cousin, or I remember this cousin, and another vehicle was behind him, stopped, and my dad, or this younger cousin of mine and I, we grabbed the branch, we pulled it back as my dad directed this other cousin and the car behind him to go on past. And not long after that, the power goes out. And usually the power goes out, you think, well, it'll be back on in a few hours, you know. But I remember the power went out, so my dad and I, we go out onto the patio, we get the kerosene heater that we had out there, we bring it in, we put it in the kitchen floor, light it. That's all we had for heat at the time, was a kerosene heater. And I remember we closed a few of the doors in the house to try to keep all the heat within the rooms that we were actually in. And I remember the first night we had to sleep We slept in the bedroom, and it was pretty freaking cold. It just had like a standard little light on, and I remember like a little battery operated light, just had that on. And I remember the next day still had no power. And I remember my mom calling the power company, and they were like, "We hope to get the power back on this evening." That evening came around, they still hadn't got it back. I remember my mom called, they're like, we should have it back the next day. Next day rolled around, still no power. My mom called, they were pretty much like, "We don't know when we'll get it back." And we're like, "Oh crap, this is bad." So by the second day with no electricity, by that point, none of us had electricity. Like the entire hollow had no electricity, except there was a guy who lives just down the road from us. Okay, well, who lived down the road from us, and he used to work for the power company at the time. And I remember he got electricity restored up to his house. Everybody above him still had no electricity. Nobody was very friendly to him after that. Very few people were friendly to him after that, knowing that. And he soon moved. After Christmas, after December, he soon moved. I would too. I don't know if he received any death threats, but yeah, that happened. And I remember, by that point, I think it was the second day, some other people that my mom knew had went to Lowe's, and they said they had some generators over there. Did my mom and dad want them to go ahead and get one and bring it to us, and my mom could just pay them back? So my mom said yeah. So they brought the generator. I remember my dad and I going out over to the road, and I remember we unloaded the generator. My mom and dad and I were out there on the patio with flashlights, reading the instructions, trying to figure out how to get it going. My dad went out to get gas while my mom and I hooked up the extension cords and just read over the instructions on how to get the thing ready. Never had a generator before this. Let me tell you, they are definitely worth having. If you don't have a generator, get one. No, this is not an advertisement. It's for your own safety, it's for your own good, and for your own sanity. And I remember we started the generator up, and it was like, oh! We plugged the microwave up to it whenever we would need it. Otherwise, we used a light, the refrigerator, and an electric heater. And I remember we plugged that up, and we were able to actually sleep in the bedroom that night with an electric heater. And I remember this younger cousin and I, by like the third day with no electricity, people's emotions were beginning to wear thin. The patience was beginning to wear really thin. And it was just so gloomy. Like, you could not stay inside the house because it was just dark. It was depressing, knowing you had no electricity. So I remember this cousin and I, we would go outside like every single day into the snow. We would go sledding just to get away from our parents because it was just so gloomy. It was just so depressing. And we kept waiting and waiting for a power company, for a power truck to go up so they could get the power back. And I remember it absolutely sucked that still had no electricity. We did have the generator, which I was very, very thankful for. We all were. But still, here we were with no electricity throughout most of the house. And I remember, again, we would go sledding and just try to keep our sanity. It was the only thing we could do to keep our sanity. And I remember Christmas Day, we still had no electricity. We plugged the generator up to the TV long enough to watch the Disney Christmas Parade. We plugged the TV up to the generator. We watched the Disney Christmas Parade, and then we used it to plug up the Christmas tree. Had electric heater going, had the Christmas tree going. I think maybe the refrigerator. And I also remember the power company was advising people to store like any frozen foods that you had in your ice box. So I remember we we got some storage boxes and put all the frozen foods that we had in the refrigerator into a storage box, and we put snow down in there, hoping that that would actually keep it good, you know. But no, we lost everything. A lot of people lost a lot of things that they had. Frozen foods, things like that, things that they had in the refrigerators. I mean, they lost a lot of stuff. And I remember we were going to go to the movies. My mom and his younger cousin and I, we were going to go to the movies just to get out of the house. And I remember, I don't even remember what movie was playing, but I remember we got to the theater, closed, because a water line had broken. A water line had busted, and so the theater was closed. And I remember we got back home, we started up in the hollow, and it was dark. No lights, no electricity. And I remember we pulled onto the drive, we pulled onto the bridge, and just stopped. And I remember just sitting there, and that younger cousin of mine said, "I don't want to get out." And I said, "I don't either," because it was just dark, like just pitch black. And I remember Christmas, like I said, Christmas Day, my mom wasn't feeling too good, and we went out to this cousin's house, his family, for Christmas dinner. And they also had got a generator the exact same night, but theirs was a little bit larger, and so they had more lights going, and they were. I remember the same Christmas, this cousin of mine, he got Far Cry. I think it was Far Cry. I think it was the first Far Cry. He got the first Far Cry, I think it was, for Christmas, and one of the rock bands. I think it was Rock Band 2. I think it was Rock Band 2. It was whichever rock band had Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer and Wanted Dead or Alive. Both of those on it. And I remember him getting that, and I remember playing the guitar. Never played rock band before, but I started playing the guitar that night, that plastic guitar. I started playing that, and I remember we were all just around the TV. He was playing drums, I was playing the guitar, and it was really fun. And I remember watching him play Far Cry, and then I remember, as it turns out, Christmas night, my mom was sick because she had suffered carbon monoxide poisoning on Christmas. The wick had messed up in the kerosene heater somehow, and it had filled the kitchen or the house with carbon monoxide. And so my mom ended up having to spend Christmas night at a friend's house because she was sick with carbon monoxide poisoning. And I remember like my dad and I, like, we couldn't stay in the house. And I remember, my dad, for some reason, I don't know why, but the dad and the cat stayed in the house. I don't know why, but I remember they stayed in the house. And even today, I still say that was a ridiculous decision, but thankfully they were okay. It didn't hurt them, somehow, thank God. But I remember I slept on the couch with my cousin, and his parents slept opposite on, like, the love seat or something, or the couch, and he and I slept on the love seat. Like, he was laying this way, like, he was laying with his head on that end, I was laying with my head on this end. And I remember sleeping on the couch, and I remember the next day, the morning of December 26th, I remember waking up and just trying to go back to sleep, but I remember hearing I remember hearing that cousin's parents talking. And I'm the kind of person, you know, I prefer peace and quiet whenever I'm trying to sleep. Like, no noise or anything, nobody talking, no TV or anything. And I remember I couldn't go back to sleep because I kept hearing them talking. I was wishing that they would shut up. And I just wanted to lay there because I had no electricity, and I was just thinking, you know, just let me go to sleep. Just let me sleep until we have electricity back. And I remember hearing them say they saw a power truck just go up the road, and it had a power pole on it. And immediately I woke up completely. And I woke this cousin up of mine, at this point, by this point, we had given up hope of getting our electricity back soon. We knew we were going to be without power. We didn't know for how long. And so we ended up, I remember this cousin and I, we got our clothes on real quick. I came down to the house, got my clothes on real quick, and we started walking up the road. We started walking up the road to try to find where the power truck went. And we found it, and it turns out it was not even the local power company that got the power back. It was a power company from Florida. It was a power company from Florida that actually got our electricity back. A power pole had broke in half and collapsed. And I remember we started walking back home, and I remember whenever we got on his bridge, boom, porch lights come on. And I remember my mom and dad had went out for a ride because, you know, they couldn't stand staying in the darkness either. So I remember they went out for a ride. I remember they had just come home. I came down to the house. I walked back down to the house, and I remember walking inside. There was the light over the stove was on. Also, my mom was okay. Like, she was totally fine. She just suffered like a little bit of carbon monoxide poisoning. It wasn't severe. She was okay. She didn't even have to go to the doctor. Thank God. But power was out for 9 days. Got it back the day after Christmas. And that's the craziest Christmas I remember having right there. Another memory that I have about a crazy Christmas. It's not exactly a crazy Christmas. Now going back to some of other memories I remember having. These are more fond memories that I have of Christmas. I remember growing up, every Christmas growing up, whenever my grandma was alive, my mom and dad and I would go up to my grandma's. We would go up to grandma's, and her house is right next door. So I just walk next door, and I remember we would sit in the living room, and my grandma would always sit in a chair. Like, the couch or the love seat. Sorry, the couch was right under a window, and my mom and dad and I would always sit there on the couch. My grandma would always sit in a chair over in the corner in front of the fireplace. And there was a love seat over here. There was a chair over here and another chair by the door. My grandma would always sit right there. And I remember the tree was always right here. Like, there was in front of the love seat, the couch that my mom and dad and I would sit at, there was a coffee table. And right here was the Christmas tree. And I remember there were many years that my mom and a cousin, a totally different cousin from the last story, would go up to grandma's, and I remember they would go up and they would put the tree up in the living room. And I would always go up there with them. I would always go. I would always go to the house with them, and I was too young to decorate the Christmas tree, but I would. Like, I remember watching, like, The Lion King on TV, while they would put the Christmas tree up, and, you know, watching some of the other old Christmas shows, like the old Rankin Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, Rudolph and Frosty's Shiny New Year, The Year Without a Santa Claus, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Jack Frost, Charlie Brown Christmas. I remember watching those, and the animated Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the animated movie. Watching that too, and I remember this cousin of mine had bought the VHS back whenever it first came out, and I remember one Christmas I had a stomach ulcer, and I didn't know what it was at the time. I was too young. I didn't know what it was. All I knew is I was having stomach trouble. Anytime that I would eat something, my stomach would hurt, and I couldn't eat very much because my stomach would hurt. And I remember laying on the couch at my grandma's, and it was just my mom and dad and I, my grandma and this cousin, and we were sitting in the living room. Only had the tree on, like I do now, and I remember sitting there, and for that Christmas I had got the Johnny Lightning. It was back whenever Johnny Lightning did the Monopoly cars, or like the theme cars, and I remember I got the '97 Ford Crown Vic, Do Not Pass Go, Jail, Johnny Lightning car, and it came, besides the car, it came with a tiny pewter Monopoly piece, which was the Crown Vic, the '97 Vic. And I remember I had that little pewter piece, and I remember playing with that on the couch, like lying there on my side, just playing with it, driving it around. And I remember this cousin asking, like, my parents how my stomach was feeling, how I was acting, and I remember after Christmas I had to go to the doctor because my stomach was still bothering me, so was tired of it, spent Christmas suffering from that, and I remember going to the doctor, and turns out I had a stomach ulcer at the time. And I remember, okay, that's not so much a fond memory, but I also remember one Christmas, I think it might have been the same Christmas, this is more fond. I remember this cousin of mine gave me Lego Island 2 for the PlayStation for Christmas. And I remember just playing the heck out of that. And I remember also one Christmas, my grandma had got me one. I don't know if anybody remembers these. Some might, but they had these big. I don't even remember. I think it was Little Tykes or something. I want to say I could be wrong, but I remember there was this big black race car, this big black Indy car, and it was a pedal car, and it was fully enclosed in plastic, and I mean it looked really good. The detail did, and it had a red steering wheel, single seat, and I remember getting that. My grandma got that for me for Christmas. And I remember she had it hid in the first bedroom, and because her house has 3 bedrooms, like the main bedroom and 2 guest rooms. And I remember she had it hid in the first guest room, that was actually my grandfather's room whenever he was alive. And I remember she had it hid in there, and I remember walking in there and seeing it sitting there. And I remember jumping about for joy, and my gosh, I played with that so much outside that spring and summer. Like I rode that thing so much outside. And I remember Christmas, after, everybody would open the gifts, and I remember the adults would always let the kids open the presents, open their presents first, because as a child growing up, you didn't have the patience. You did not have the patience to wait for the adults to open their gifts. Like, you didn't care about that. You just wanted to get your toys and play. You didn't care about the boring adults. Like, you didn't care about the stories of days of old, of Christmases past. You wanted your toys. And so, funny to think how things have changed. So now I will happily sit around and listen to people tell about their Christmases growing up. Now I will happily sit and listen because I have an interest in that. But I remember the kids would open their gifts, and I remember, I think one year getting like a big plastic fire truck. And a couple of other cousins and I, we got our toys. We would go in another room, like the kitchen or the dining room, and we would start playing with our toys while the adults were still in the living room, having to pick up the remains of the mess that we made, throwing the paper, like just tearing the paper and the bows aside, and we would just throw them aside, and we would just throw them aside. Didn't even care. Like, we'll let the adults take care of it. And then, the adults would open up their gifts, and, it was just kind of how that it was, I guess. It was just how that it was, kind of, like someone would open up a gift, and then they would just start talking for 10 minutes before someone else would open up another gift. And as a child, we had no patience for that. And I remember, I remember bringing the toys back home and storing them on the bed in the bedroom that I had at the time. And I remember Christmas dinner. My mom and dad and I would always sit at the little bar that my grandma had in her kitchen. We would always sit at this little bar, and my grandma would sit opposite of us, in entryway into the kitchen, in this chair. She would always sit in that same chair, and she'd eat there, and everybody else, because like the uncle, aunt, cousin, would sit at the dining room table on the other side. It was I always liked that, and I remember one year my uncle was watching Christmas Story on TV, and we had the TV on, and you could see it. And in the dining room, my grandma had a Christmas tree also in the dining room that I would always put up for her. Growing up, that was a tradition that I adopted. Like every Thanksgiving, I would go to her house. I would go next door, and I would put a Christmas tree up. I would put like a standard 6 foot tall Christmas tree, artificial, in her dining room. I would always put that up for her on Thanksgiving Day. And so on Christmas, we would still have this tree in the dining room. And I remember sitting there with my mom and dad and my grandma eating, and then I remember we'd sit up there and just kind of talk after dinner, and it would be late, like 10 or 11 o'clock before we would come back home. And I remember I remember my mom had like a tradition where she would go up and sit with her mom, my grandma, until after midnight on Christmas. And there were several times that I went up there with her, and we would sit and just kind of talk until after midnight on Christmas night. And I remember one year, some of the family just was mad at us for some reason. And so it was just my mom, my grandma, and a cousin and I. And honestly, I was totally fine with that. We all were. We were totally fine with it. And I remember just us sitting in the living room, opening up the gifts that we had, and just sitting talking by the Christmas tree, and eating dinner, Christmas dinner, just us. And I remember, I remember my grandma was usually always the last one to get done eating, because she was a really slow eater. She was always the last one to get done eating. And I remember, like, my mom, I remember my dad would still sit at the bar while my mom would try to clean up, store the food, put it in containers, things like that. And I remember still sitting there at the bar, my dad sitting at the bar, and my grandma still sitting there with her plate in her lap. And but yeah, those are some Christmas memories that I have, and those are really fond memories. And I hope to God that I never forget them. That I always remember those. But those are some Christmas memories that I had that I wanted to share with you guys. And those are some really fond memories of mine, back whenever my grandma was alive. I mean, my mom and dad and I we still have some fond memories, just us as well, after grandma passed away. But I still remember those memories of whenever my grandma was still alive. But again, I wanted to share with you guys some memories, like for a Christmas themed video. I don't know where my Christmas hats. Oh, dang it, I didn't even see them. Dang it, I didn't even see them. didn't even see this over there. If I had seen this, I would have wore this. Dang it. If I had seen this, I would have wore this during this video. Anyway, that's some Christmas memories that I have that I wanted to share with you guys for a nice Christmas themed video. But again, if you guys have some memories as well that you want to share, please feel free to do so in the comments, or if you want to make your own video talking about it, please feel free to do so. But please, if you do, please link the video in the comments below so that we can check it out too. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed me sharing some of my Christmas memories with you. And again, anything you want to say, please feel free to do so in the comments. And so hopefully, again, thank you guys again for joining me, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next video. And again, Merry Christmas, God bless, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next video that I do. Take care.